Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you the inside of my latest book, Timeline of the Bible, which includes one large removable chart and 4 fold-out charts that have never before been shown on this channel. Now, I'm really excited about this particular book because it's different in one major way from my previous 2 books, Timeline of World History and Timeline of the British Monarchy. For these first 2 books, I provided the charts, but someone else wrote the text, and that's why there are 2 authors listed on the covers. However, for this one, not only did I provide the charts, but I actually wrote the book as well. In fact, much of the text is based on the videos I've done on this channel, such as my Who Wrote the Bible series. Okay, so let's open it up and have a look. First of all, there's this elastic band, which just helps keep all the charts nice and neat inside. And if we open it up, in the pocket of the front cover is a chart that you can remove and open up. And when you open it up, it's about the same size as the posters we sell on our website. And this one, the main chart, basically shows you a timeline of the books of the Bible and when each one was written. So the blue section over here is about the Pentateuch or the Torah. The yellow is the prophets or the Nevi'im. And the green section is the writings or Ketuvim. But we also have here the Apocrypha and, of course, the New Testament as well. And throughout, some important manuscripts are shown. And then along the side, you have a timeline with dates, which basically tells you what was going on historically when all the books of the Bible were written. Now, I won't go through this in great detail because I've actually done that on the channel already. I'll leave a link to that in the description. However, I do want to explain this top part of the chart. So as I've mentioned several times on the channel, one of the most important dates, probably the most important dates when it comes to biblical chronology is 930 BCE or 931. And the reason for that is it's the start of verifiable Bible history. From this point onwards, everything in the Bible matches up pretty closely with what we know from secular history. And this date is the start of the divided kingdom, where we have 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And we can look at the list of the kings given in the Bible and some of the other kings of other nations and correlate those and come up with the date 930 as the start of the reigns of King Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And so this date is one that no one really debates or argues over, whether you've got a Christian scholar or a Jewish scholar or a secular scholar, an atheist. It doesn't matter. Everyone pretty much can agree with this particular date. However, everything before that, all the way back to Adam and Eve, this part of the Bible, according to an academic view, is more legend and mythology. However, it is possible to use the dates given internally in the Bible to come up with certain specific years when events happened. And we can do this by starting with this first verifiable date, 930. And again, sometimes it's 931, so there's some small differences. But let's use 930. And we know that King Solomon reigned for 40 years. King Solomon was the last king, according to the Bible, of the unified kingdom of Israel and Judah before it split in 2. Now, there's some debate over whether a unified kingdom ever actually existed. I'm not going to go into that now. I'm just going to show you the timeline as the Bible tells it. So we know he reigned for 40 years, and he built the temple in the 4th year of his reign, which means that there was 36 years following the construction of the temple until the kingdom is split in 930 at the death of Solomon, which means that if we add 36 to here, we get 966 BCE, which is the date that Solomon would have built the temple. Now, we can use various verses in the Bible. In 1 Kings 6 verse 1, it says that the temple was built exactly 480 years after the Exodus. Now, some will argue that this is probably a symbolic literary date, but again, for this timeline here, we're just going to take internally what the Bible says. So if we add 480 years to 966, we come up with 1446 as a date for the Exodus. Now again, we can use a particular scripture, Exodus 12 verse 40, which says that the Exodus took place exactly 430 years after the Israelites first came down into Egypt, which then means that if we add 430 to this, we come to 1876 as the year that Jacob and his family moved from Canaan down into Egypt. And we know that he did that when Jacob, was 130 years old. We also know that Jacob was born when Isaac was 60 years old, and Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. So altogether, that's 290 years. And if we add that on top of 1876, we then get 2166 BCE for the birth of Abraham. But we can go back even further, because in the early parts of the Bible, in Genesis 11, it gives us, so-and-so was so many years old when he begot the next person, and so forth. So if we add up all those numbers, we get 292 years between the flood and Abraham. So if we add that to 2166, we get 2458 for Noah and the flood. And then finally, if we use the genealogies given in Genesis chapter 5, which again tells us, it gives us a bunch of numbers when so-and-so begot so-and-so, we add all those up and we get 1,656 years. So if we add that to 2458, we get 4,114 BCE as the date of creation, or at least when God creates Adam and Eve. So this is just one possible timeline. There are several other slightly different ways to calculate some of these dates. There's some debate. I did a whole video about that called Biblical Chronology. Again, I'll put that in the description if you want to check it out. But approximately, if you take the Bible literally, the date of creation comes to around 4000 BCE. Now, again, I tend to look at all of this from a more academic perspective, and so I understand this as being myth and legend. However, there are still some people who see this all as literal. Regardless of your point of view, I wanted to put these numbers here just so that you can understand the biblical story from a literary point of view and when various events happened. Okay, so that is the main chart that comes with the book. But I want to emphasize that really, although there's those numbers at the top, this timeline is not a timeline of the events in the Bible as much as it is a timeline of the Bible itself, the Bible's composition. So when the various books of the Bible were written. And that's what the rest of the chart shows you. But for now, we are going to fold that back up and put it in its pocket. And we're then going to look at the book itself. Timeline of the Bible. Now, one thing I notice, one thing I say right here in the preface is that this book is for everyone, whether you're a Christian, a Jew, a follower of another religion, an atheist, unaffiliated, whatever. I try to be as neutral as possible. Of course, there are many different views out there about the Bible and its contents. and I wanted to write a book that everyone could benefit from. So let's keep going. The first spread is introduction and what is in the Bible. And throughout, I wanted to make it clear that the Bible is used by many different groups. A lot of people think of the Bible as simply a Christian book, but the first part of the Bible, anyway, the Hebrew Bible, is also used by Jews. So I wanted to make that clear. So you can see here there's a picture of a Jew reading the Torah, but then also probably here some Catholic nuns reading the Bible. So here I explain the various parts of the Bible, and then there's this chart here which sums everything up. So the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament are pretty much the same. There are some differences, the main one being that the Hebrew Bible does not include any of the apocryphal books that are included in some Christian Bibles. And the other big difference is the order of the books is different. So the Hebrew Bible has 3 parts. You can see them here in the blue, yellow, and green. And these colors correlate to that main chart that I showed you. But here you can see how in the Christian Bible, the various prophets are spread out a little bit and the writings are arranged like so. The pink, that's the Apocrypha that you'll find in Catholic Bibles. And then the purple are some other apocryphal books that are in the Ethiopian Bible, and I think a few are in the Eastern Orthodox Bible. Then we get a spread here on the sources, first of all, of the Hebrew Bible. So this is basically all about the manuscripts. And again, I've done a video on this topic. I guess I'll leave all of the links to various videos in the description that go into this in more detail. But here we have the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's also the Septuagint, the Vulgate. These are all manuscript sources that are used for us when translating the Bible and putting it together in its current form. Then here I talk about the sources for the New Testament. We have various traditions, the main ones being the Byzantine, the Western, and the Alexandrian. So I explain all of that. Then I have a section here where I go through some English Bible translations. So I talk about the early history of the Bible being translated into English, and then talk about some of the main English Bible translations that are used today. All right, so all of that was kind of introductory information. The rest of the book is divided into 4 main sections. So the first section is called Beginnings, and this deals with basically the pre-historical stuff, the stuff that academics see as being myth and legend. And here on this first page, I describe, how important the ancient Israelites are to our understanding of history because they were located right in between these 2 huge powers, the Mesopotamian powers, Assyria and Babylon, and Egypt. And those 2 cultures or civilizations had a really big impact on the Bible. Okay, so as I mentioned, the book has 4 fold-out charts, and how those work is like this. You open it up this way, and then there's a part that folds down, and there's a part that folds up. And so each fold-out chart matches the section that we're talking about. So this first one is Beginnings, and it's basically a family tree. And you can see it starts with Adam and Eve, and it goes down through Noah and the various generations of Noah. And this is very similar to the biblical family tree poster that we sell at Useful Charts. However, it's even more detailed. So you get a lot more generations here. You've got the descendants of Cain, which are not shown on the poster version. And then we have the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, which I'll be doing a video on soon here in the new year. And then we get Moses and all the way down to Samuel and David. And it's after David that we get into the historical parts of the Bible. So this first chart is basically, mostly Genesis and Exodus, the early parts of the biblical story, and the family tree there. And I'll also point out that the book includes a lot of great art. This one, Moses and the Ten Commandments. And as you'll see throughout the book, though, I tried to use a wide variety of art styles. This one, obviously very European, but I didn't use only European images. I try to use a variety throughout. Okay, so then this section then basically parallels what we just saw in that first fold-out chart. So I talk about creation. I talk about how there's two different creation accounts. Now this is a very interesting little image here, which basically shows you how the Hebrews, the Hebrew people, would have understood cosmology and the earth and so forth, and how the biblical authors would have understood the earth as being flat. They believed that there were waters underneath the earth and waters above the earth and various levels of heaven and so forth. Obviously, we know the earth is not flat. And so this talks about how that understanding of the world also is very similar to some Mesopotamian views of the world, and so forth. I talk a lot about, throughout the book, about the dating, which I explained to you when I looked at the main chart. That's Cain killing Abel. Then we've got the flood, Noah and the flood, and the ark and the animals. Explain about the dating of the flood. Something here about the Tower of Babel, the Table of Nations, and basically how Noah's children and grandchildren, in the text, all those names are actually names of places. And so it was kind of a way for the ancient Israelites and Judahites to explain the neighbors and how they're related to other tribes and kingdoms and so forth. Then we've got the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is a image of Ur in present-day Iraq, which is where the Bible says Abraham came from. And then we talk about Joseph. I like this image here. It looks a lot more Middle Eastern, but this is supposed to be Joseph when he's the prime minister of Egypt. And here I talk about further evidence of dual origin stories. And if you watch my series on who wrote the Bible, you'll know what I'm talking about here. And that is an idea that's come up recently in biblical scholarship, that perhaps originally there were two different origin stories for the Israelite people, one involving Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and one involving Moses and the Exodus, and that originally these were two separate stories that explained where the Israelites came from. But then at some point they were combined. So if you want to hear more about that, you'll want to watch episode 1 of my Who Wrote the Bible series. Then we have Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. This is a really important image. This comes from the Dura Europos synagogue in Syria. And that particular synagogue, which is no longer in use, it was found buried and then excavated. This place is very important because on the walls of the synagogue are all these murals, which include the oldest depictions we have of Bible characters anywhere in the world, with one possible exception, which I'll show you a little later. So you can see here we have Moses parting the Red Sea, and he looks very Middle Eastern as opposed to European, which is much more accurate. Down here, this is a monastery located at the traditional location of Mount Sinai. And here is something quite interesting. Most people are familiar with the Ten Commandments, but in the location in the Bible where the Ten Commandments that we know are listed, it doesn't actually say 10 commandments. However, there is a section in the Torah where the words 10 commandments do appear. And the funny thing is we get a completely different list of 10 commandments as compared to the ones we're used to. So you can check that out. Then we have a section about the period of Joshua and Judges, the 12 tribes and how they're distributed in the land according to the biblical account. This is Samson. It's the Ark of the Covenant. But then this final section in the beginnings portion of the book talks about the real origin of the Israelites. According to the academic perspective, like I said, the early parts of the Bible are myth and legend, and really the emergence of the Israelites has a lot to do with the Bronze Age collapse. And so here I discuss some of the theories, the Hyksos, the Shasu, the Habaru. These are all groups of ancient people that might be connected somehow to the biblical Israelites. This is the Merneptah stele. Very important archaeological find because it contains the earliest reference to Israel. And you can see that comes from 1208 BCE. All right. The second section of the book is about the period of the monarchy, the ancient Israelite kingdoms, of which there were two. That's why we have the word kingdoms here. There was Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Obviously, King David. Here is King Solomon. But let's go ahead and open up this second fold-out chart. So we go down here, and then this part folds up. So this chart starts with David, who was at the bottom of the previous chart. So basically, it's the same chart, just continued. Again, this is found on our biblical family tree poster that we sell. But again, this is a little bit more detailed. So we have David and Solomon. And then we have the various kings of Israel and Judah. So yellow is the northern kingdom of Israel. Blue is Judah. But then we have also some of the nearby kingdoms, such as Egypt, Syria, the Assyrians. And as we go down, eventually the northern tribes fall to the Assyrians. That occurred in 722 BCE. And then Judah keeps going alone on its own until it falls to Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar. The Assyrians themselves also fell to the Babylonians at this point, and the Egyptians become far less significant. But then here at the bottom, the Babylonian Empire actually did not last long, and they very quickly fell to the Persians, the Achaemenid Empire, and that's where the next chart will begin. We'll get to that a little later. So that's what the second fold-out chart looks like. Let's fold it back up and keep going. Okay, let's turn the page. This first spread of the second section goes through and talks about Israel's greatest kings, David and Solomon. And like I said, there is some debate over whether the United Monarchy did exist. We've got a great diagram here of Solomon's temple. And this was actually done by my good friend Syawish from Mukaddimah. He helped with some of the maps and so forth throughout the book. David beheading Goliath, of course. And here we have the start of verifiable history. So I explained that date, 930 or 931. Here's Elijah and the prophets of Baal and fire coming from heaven. Talk about some of the archaeology. Here's another important find, the Mesha stele, which mentions King Omri, one of the very first Israelite kings that we know of from outside of the Bible. It's a map of the two kingdoms. Here we talk about the rise of Assyria. This is basically what the Assyrian Empire looked like. And this is another archaeological find. Remember I said there was one exception to the earliest Bible character shown? This here would be the earliest. This is King Jehu bowing down to Shalmaneser of Assyria. And this is an Assyrian stele that depicts that. So that's our first Bible character that we found a depiction of in the archaeological record. So I talk about some of the early prophets. And then Israel's final kings. Israel falls to Assyria, and Israel's loss ends up being Judah's gain, because from this point forward, Judah really grows in influence and power. This is a real photo from today of the Pool of Siloam, which was probably built by King Hezekiah, and some walls that still exist from Hezekiah's time. Talk here about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. I'm going to talk about that in an upcoming video. Then Judah's golden age, so King Josiah. Little Star Wars reference there. A forgotten prophet or prophetess. Very few people know Huldah, but she was actually a pretty key figure. Then we get the fall of Jerusalem. Incredible painting here of the Israelites being carried off to Babylon with Jerusalem on fire. Here's the gates of Babylon there, and what the Babylonian king probably would have looked like. By the rivers of Babylon, a little reference to a famous song there. Then we've got the three big prophets in the Hebrew Bible. Big as in they wrote longer books. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And that's the end of section 2. All right, we now come to section 3, which is the Second Temple period. And the other term that's sometimes used for this period is the intertestamental period, because it talks a lot about events that occurred between the end of the Hebrew Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, and the New Testament. So a lot of people are actually quite unfamiliar with this period in time, but to biblical scholars, it's actually the most important period, because it's actually during the Second Temple period that almost all of the Hebrew Bible was written, or at least compiled and edited and made into its final form. So this period is not to be skipped over. This is super important to understanding the Bible. Okay, so let's open up the third fold-out chart. Here we have an image of what the Second Temple looked like during the reign of King Herod. This is actually a model that's located in the museum. Open this up. So the Second Temple period, we begin this chart where the other one left off. So we have Cyrus the Great of Persia, the Achaemenid Empire, and Darius the Great, and the rest of the Persian emperors over here. But then we have the House of David continues. We don't get kings, but we get what's called the exilarchs. And these were the descendants of the Judahite kings. So we get a character called Zerubbabel, who helped lead one of the earliest group of people back to Judea. Of course, I forgot to mention one of the important things about the Persians is that they allowed the Judahites, now called Jews, to return to the land and rebuild the temple. And basically in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they're also shown on the chart. Ezra was a priest and also a scribe, whereas Nehemiah was more of a secular leader. And so we get them on the chart. But then, like I said, we move into the intertestamental period, and what happens during that time is that Persia falls to Alexander the Great, and then after Alexander the Great dies, his empire is divided into 4 different dynasties, the 2 important ones being the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And the book of Daniel actually deals quite a bit with this period. This red section over here, these are the high priests. We eventually get a dynasty called the Oneids. But then when a secular ruler called Antiochus IV takes over, and this ties into the story of Hanukkah. He famously sacrifices a pig in the temple, and that, of course, really angers the Jews, and so you get the Maccabees revolt and overthrow the Greeks and set up their own independent kingdom. So this is the Hasmonean dynasty, which again, Judea, which is basically equivalent to the old kingdom of Judah, once again has independent rulers. But then what happens is that there's a civil war between these 2 guys, and by this point the Romans are the big power, and they intervene and basically take over Judea as a client state of Rome. And they end up replacing the Hasmoneans with their puppet, Herod the Great, who, of course, we read about in the very beginning of the New Testament. He was actually married to one of the last Hasmoneans, a princess, and so that kind of gave him legitimacy. And then you can see the various Herods. There was more than one because a lot of his children were also named Herod. And so in the New Testament, whenever it mentions Herod, you have to be careful because it's not always talking about the same person. There's at least 3 different Herods, I think, or 4 or 5. I lost count. But a lot of different Herods mentioned in the New Testament. And so this chart basically ends with the New Testament Gospels and who was in charge of Judea at that time. Here you even have some of the high priests. Eventually the Hasmoneans are kicked out, and then the high priests are voted in instead. And so you have Annas and Caiaphas, who are important because they were the high priests when Jesus was crucified. So let's fold that back up and take a look at the 3rd section. Okay, so this first spread talks about the return to Jerusalem. It mentions Ezra and Nehemiah. You can see here how large the Achaemenid Empire was. And we have a map of Jerusalem at the time of Nehemiah. I didn't point out earlier, but throughout the book, you do have dates that match whatever's being talked about because this is a book called Timeline of the Bible. So the dates there kind of provide the timeline. And then we have this spread all about the development of the Torah, or the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And again, I've done a whole video about this, the first video in my Who Wrote the Bible series, where I talk about the documentary hypothesis. And basically, all academic scholars today believe that the Torah was not written by Moses, but rather it was compiled much later from a variety of documents and sources that tend to be labeled J, E, P, and D. And so this little chart here basically shows the breakdown. The yellow is J, green is E, red is P, and blue is D. And even we can break it down a little further than that. Now, a lot of people, in comment sections complain about, well, the documentary hypothesis has been debunked. In a way, it has, but what hasn't been debunked is the fact that the Pentateuch is comprised of multiple sources. Nobody debates that. The old documentary hypothesis has been replaced by newer theories, such as the supplementary hypothesis. And there's also the fragmentary hypothesis. But what they all have in common is the understanding that there are sources involved, or layers perhaps, or sources are a better word. No one doubts that. So just because the original hypothesis had problems doesn't mean that the whole thing has been thrown out. All right, this is about Psalms, Proverbs, and Job. So we're now getting into the section of the Bible known as the writings. Here's actually something from Egypt, a particular book that probably inspired some of the Proverbs. Then we get some more prophets, some more books of poetry, such as the Book of Ruth, Song of Solomon's, etc. This spread here talks about the arrival of the Greeks. So we get Alexander the Great, and then things are split into the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And this is, again, like I said, really important for the book of Daniel, which was probably the final book in the Hebrew Bible to be written. And there's a lot of prophecies in that book. But from an academic point of view, those prophecies are really kind of not predictions, but post-dictions of certain historical events that happened. Some nice artwork there of Nebuchadnezzar's statue and the four beasts in the book of Daniel. Then we get the Maccabees and all the way to the Herodians. So this describes the Maccabean revolt and the Hanukkah story. Antiochus IV there, and then basically Rome takes over. And by the time of Jesus, we get some major sects that you're probably familiar with, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees. So this little part talks about how they came to be. But before this section ends, I also include some information about the Apocrypha. These are books that aren't found in the Hebrew Bible nor in Protestant Bibles, but they are included in the Catholic Bible, Orthodox Bible, Ethiopian Bible, and so forth. So this is some information here about books like Tobit and the Book of Enoch and Jubilees and so forth. All right, which brings us to the New Testament, which is the final section in this book. All right, so let's open the fourth and final fold-out chart. And here you're going to see something that I've never shown on the channel and looks quite unlike any of my other charts, because this is exclusively the genealogy of Jesus. And of course, in the New Testament, we get two different versions, one by Matthew, one by Luke, and this kind of combines them both. So the red line is Luke and the blue line is Matthew. And in Luke, we get 77 names all the way from Adam. But in Matthew, we get, it's starting with Abraham, and we get 3 groups of 14 generations. So this chart explains how some generations are skipped over. It also points out Matthew includes 4 female names. And then at the bottom, we get kind of the more close-up genealogy family tree of Jesus. And this includes some traditional material as well. The New Testament, of course, mentions Mary's cousin Elizabeth and Zechariah, who are the parents of John the Baptist. But these two characters, Anne and Joachim, don't actually show up in the New Testament, but are in some apocryphal books. But they're supposedly the parents of Mary, and then we can even have her grandparents' names as well if we look at apocryphal information. And again, this part here also speculative, based on apocryphal books, not the New Testament. According to some traditional accounts, Mary had some sisters who were also named Mary, and perhaps this Mary here was the mother of James, Judas, and Simon, who are known as the brothers of Jesus. And again, this is not, necessarily historical or known as fact, but based on various Christian traditions, which sometimes contradict each other, but this kind of just shows some possibilities. So in some traditions, James, who might have been a cousin of Jesus, is the same person as James, the son of Alphaeus. Judas, also known as Thaddeus, also might have been one of his cousins. Simon the Zealot might have been one of his cousins. And then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, might have been the sons of this woman here. If you want to dive more into that, I did do a video about the genealogy of Jesus, so I'll link that in the description, and there I'll go into more details about what sources all of this is based on. But that basically just shows some of the possibilities and some of the traditions that are out there. So that's the fourth and final fold-out chart. Okay, so the first two spreads, I think it is, two spreads is basically the story of Jesus as told in the Gospels. So talk a little bit about the birth, the ministry, the parables. I'll point out one of the earliest depictions of Jesus that we have, archaeologically speaking. This is from one of the catacombs. And then we have this huge piece of artwork that shows all kinds of scenes from the life of Jesus, stuff about his final week, his death, resurrection, etc. Okay, then this spread is kind of about the book of Acts, which talks about the early church. Again, another very early depiction of Jesus from the catacombs, the arrival of the Holy Spirit, then Paul on the road to Damascus, another archaeological find here, one of the earliest examples of the fish being used as a Christian symbol. But then basically Christianity goes from being just a sect of Judaism, a new sect of Judaism, to being a mostly Gentile religion, mostly because of Paul. And this next section talks about the Gospels in the book of Acts and goes through some of the hypotheses about who based their book on who and so forth. Again, in my Who Wrote the Bible series, I talk about a lot of those hypotheses and as well about how the Gospel of John is different from the first three synoptics. Also, I talk about an apocryphal book here, the Gospel of Thomas. Then we've got a spread here about the Pauline epistles. Paul, of course, being one of the, definitely the most prolific author of the New Testament. We know that he wrote at least, even academics agree, he wrote at least 7 books, possibly more. And this map kind of shows some of his epistles, such as Romans, Corinthians, Thessalonians, where all those letters were sent to. Of the various Pauline epistles, Galatians is the only one that's written to kind of a whole area as opposed to a specific city. So this talks about some of his missionary journeys. And this final spread is about the general epistles, Hebrews, James, John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. And there we have the 4 horsemen. And this is also the last page in this book, the timeline of the Bible. And I end with this little inset here, which points out that both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament end with very similar imagery. In the Jewish version of the Hebrew Bible, what the Christians call the Old Testament, the last book is actually Chronicles or 2nd Chronicles. And so therefore, the very end of the Hebrew Bible, it ends with a vision of the New Jerusalem and the people going up to the city of Jerusalem. And interestingly, the New Testament, book of Revelation, which would be the last book in the Christian Bible, also ends with a vision of a new Jerusalem. But this time it's coming down from heaven. So I find that interesting that both the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible both end with this kind of imagery of God and his people being united. All right, that is the end of the book. We then have an index, acknowledgments, and there we go. And we can put this back like here. So that was a flip through of my latest book, Timeline of the Bible. And this releases, it has been available at Costco in North America, but it releases everywhere else, including the usefulcharts.com website on January the 9th. So you can actually go there right now and pre-order the book, or if it's after January 9th, you can just order it straight up directly from us at usefulcharts.com. We only ship to Canada and the United States. So if you're other parts of the world, you can maybe look at it through whatever bookstore is available to you, or one of the Amazon sites or something like that. But if you're in the States or in Canada, I do encourage you to buy directly from us at usefulcharts.com. That helps support the company and this channel. All right, thanks for watching.